All right. Thank you, Sumatra. Thank you, Congressman, for that excellent discussion. We're going to move now to our congressional plenary speeches, starting with one from Representative Dan Bishop. Congressman Bishop has emerged as one of the most exciting new conservative voices in Congress. He represents North Carolina's 8th Congressional District. And before coming to Congress, Congressman Bishop served in North Carolina's General Assembly and took on some of the hardest fights that state faced, such as the fight over the transgender bathroom issue. Since coming to Congress in 2019, Congressman Bishop continues picking the tough but righteous battles on the national level, pushing for foreign policy, realism, restraint, while the Uniparty continues to beat the drums of war. Please join me in welcoming Congressman Dan Bishop.
Thanks, Emil. Good to be with you. It's been kind of an active 2 weeks up here. I don't know if you guys are following ongoing efforts over in the House, but we've been busy having constructive conflict, and we're still working on that, but I've got my focus sort of distracted. I was thinking about what I might say to you here today, and you know, it's interesting. Warren, a good friend Warren, a great expert on the issues he was discussing, and my housemate, among other things, but a great thinker. You know, one thing that is true I found in Washington in the 4 years I've been here is that there's lots of sophistication in Washington. There are experts everywhere you look. And yet the results are often seem to fall short of the product that expertise, genuine expertise, would provide. I'm a strong fan of the power of common sense. I think the test of the validity of any philosophical or theoretical system is its predictive power. You know, can it, applied across time, predict outcomes in a way that lets you know that your thinking about inputs is correct? And so as we're poised for spending decisions in this Congress, we've been through our debt ceiling thing. We have the resolution of the speaker's contest in January with the principles that are required. We have the appropriations process at hand. We have, as Warren just mentioned, people talking about limits to spending, but folks already wanting to do supplementals to continue feeding the war effort in Ukraine, just as it's been done so far. How can smart people constantly be so wrong? And what do we do about that? How do we think about that? And I thought for this, it gets just as a common sense guy, and all you guys are probably in touch with the details on this even more than I am, but just a trip down memory lane since the inception of the Ukraine conflict in February of last year. Putin is Hitler. He's bent on the invasion of Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Poland, even Norway. Not only was that his intent, but it was imminent, we were told. It required an unlimited commitment by the United States to do everything that it took to support Ukraine as long as it took. But in fact, as history unraveled, he bogged down in the eastern provinces of Ukraine, and he's never advanced beyond that. You have this constant tension in the stories. You remember the 40-mile-long string of tanks that were ripe to be destroyed on the field, and the constant stories of command incompetence? Seems to be a conflict didn't predict well the full unfolding events. And now Russia is bogged down well east of the Dnieper River. And we hear these stories continuing endlessly of command incompetence. The policy approach of pouring a torrent of military resources into Ukraine with the expectation of destroying the Russian military, forcing a complete withdrawal from Ukrainian territory, And as Warren also just mentioned, there were those who were whispering the thoughts of regime change in Russia. That was the plan, right? And it was to happen fast in February of last year. But again, we haven't seen anything like that turn of events. And every time that it falls short of occurring, the rhetoric we hear from those in that general school of thought is we just haven't applied enough resources. We need to give, it needed to do the tanks faster. We need to do F-16s faster. The non-falsifiable theory. So rather than having the Russians thrown out of Ukraine by the resolve of the West and maybe regime change in Russia, 15 months in, we have the term tossed around more and more frequently, frozen conflict. We heard that the Ukrainian military was mythic almost in its courage and the capacity of its leadership, that Zelensky was Churchillian. And yet, as the events have rolled along, we see striking things. New York Times forced to run an article the other day about the inexplicable and disturbing, I believe they used the term disturbing, presence of Nazi iconography and references repeatedly occurring in major Ukrainian force components. We see a story emerging in the Washington Post that it was Ukraine who was planning to destroy, to sabotage the Nord Stream pipelines. You know, first it was Russia that was doing that. News story that emerges, of course, now Russia being accused of destroying the dam in territory occupied by the Russian army. How will that turn out? Will it follow the same pattern that we've seen? And how is this consistent with a fighting force in Ukraine that can be depended upon to defeat the Russians soundly, and yet we haven't seen that develop either? So we've sent, the United States has sent $110 billion spent on that conduct, on the conduct of that effort in Ukraine, and we are now at 15 months in, still expectant about a counteroffensive. Remember that last fall we saw, according to media reports, material advances by Ukrainian forces retaking territory from Russia. That lasted for a while, and then we were told we were going to wait for a spring offensive supported by Western munitions and supplies. June on my calendar is not the spring. And even now, what we see is more terminology emerging, almost parroted by media outlet after media outlet. There are shaping operations. The first stages we understand of a counteroffensive. And yet, we also see the entry into Bakhmut. Ukrainian forces, as the news has emerged, a meat grinder for Ukrainian forces. So we see immense suffering by Ukrainian population, immense losses by Ukrainian military personnel, perhaps grinding down the Russian military, and perhaps that has utility for the United States, but always these ideas seem to be bound up in theories that have little predictive power. How long must we go before the joy that Lindsey Graham expresses in killing Russians, best money we've ever spent, I believe was the quote, how long can we go while that notion can continue to be expressed by an American policymaker? I hope not long. The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that you don't need to be a student of theory, convicted about a rules-based order, a globalist, a realist. If you apply tests of common sense, the effort that's been undertaken in the name of American foreign policy is not bearing the results that we've been promised from day one. And at each step, what American policymakers, what advocates of the neocon point of view in Congress want to do is to double down. I was in a private meeting with one of the most influential on that score within the last 30 days, who explained that all of what we need to do in the United States is to project military power abroad, because we want to fight people there rather than fight them here, but that's expensive. I can't argue with the premises. We want to have a strong military. We want to have a presence in the world that is reflective of American strength. But their ideas are not working. It isn't working out for the Ukrainians. It isn't working out for the American people, and the difficulty we have, increasing difficulty of affording the costs of the policy that's engaged in, the debt that we continue to accrue that poses risk of disaster for our children and our grandchildren. It is not bearing out for world geopolitics, where Russia is compelled to be the junior partner, not another strategic power vying with China, but a junior partner with China. And China, dominating the relationship, begins to spread its apparatus through Pakistan and into Iran as a principal weapons supplier. And the Middle East begins to realign. The BRIC countries consider how their currencies, what currency to trade in. Their ideas are not working. That's the problem. And common sense dictates the answer to that. If your ideas are not working, if every one of your predictions fails to come true, how can it be the right answer to continue to do the same thing or more, to double down and do more of the same thing? I submit, ladies and gentlemen, that just doesn't pass the test of common sense. And that's why it is critical that those of us who represent the American people, who are a people of common sense, in this Congress, cannot accept the uniparty approach to doing the same thing in the same way or doing even more of the same thing. The only way that will change is if we enter into constructive conflict. We can't have more deals like the debt ceiling deal that we just inked, where we capitulated, Republicans capitulated to the policy priorities of the Biden administration and left the debt on track to accrue $4 trillion more or more in the next year and a half. We simply cannot do it. So in the House, our challenge right now, and Warren commented on this as well, and I'm pleased to see it as well, but we'll see we need to follow through. The Speaker has, if you will, doubled down on his recent rhetoric that there are no more blank checks, that he's not prepared to see supplementals breaking the caps that he's just agreed to. That's where we are, ladies and gentlemen. I said to you, to the American conservative at your anniversary dinner some months ago, that what is most needed here is not more experts, not more of the people that Warren described and who believe that they are the stewards of American good fortune and they reside in the think tanks and in the bureaucracies and in the committee staffs in Washington. It is the American people whose common sense must be reasserted. And there is no greater illustration of how important and imperative it is that it be reasserted than the last 15 months in Ukraine. The fact is that the globalists, the advocates of the rules-based order, and those who believe we hitch the United States fiscal wagon to that and spend until kingdom come, they have great aspiration on their side. They want the result to be one that we can be proud of and that will be effective and that would be better for the flourishing of mankind everywhere. But they're simply not correct. They cannot predict the outcome of their policy in a world that isn't cooperating with them. And it falls to those of us who are prepared to, through the assertion of will, make a change. And this Congress will tell the is going to tell the tale. This Congress, where we're divided power, but where we are, with that narrow majority in the House, having some of the most consequential conversations and deliberations I think have occurred here in the last 25 years. And it is not an easy path. But I am convinced that common sense will prevail. And we'll see this thing turn in a direction that makes sense for the American people. God bless you all. Glad to be with you.